Very, very good morning, distinguished delegates, prime ministers, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gail Hurley. I'm a senior advisor on development finance with UNDP, based in New York, and it's a real pleasure and honor to moderate this morning's discussion on financing the blue economy, a Caribbean development opportunity. It's fantastic to see such an excellent turnout this morning, especially after last night's late cultural night, which I trust you all enjoyed. And really great to see so much interest in this really important topic. A warm welcome also to my distinguished panelists who join us this morning to answer all the hard questions about the blue economy, so no pressure there. Thank you to the Caribbean Development Bank for the invitation to moderate this discussion, and also thank you to our hosts, the Government of Grenada, who are really recognized as an early mover and a pioneer on the blue economy. So the discussions this morning will center in part around a new paper and the main findings and recommendations of that new paper, Financing the Blue Economy, a Caribbean Development Opportunity, which has been produced by the Caribbean Development Bank in partnership with my team at UNDP, and I'm informed that there are copies available at the back on USB drives, so do please take one of those away with you. Dr. Roger McLeod, an economist with the Caribbean Development Bank, will kickstart our discussion today with a brief overview of the report and the main findings and recommendations. But before I invite him to take the floor, let me perhaps start with a few reflections from my side and a few questions for our panelists and perhaps for our audience, some issues perhaps for you to think about for our discussion this morning. First and perhaps most importantly, what do we understand by the blue economy concept? In the report, it's referred to as a sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth and inclusive development. The idea that economic activity, ocean-based economic activity, very much must be in balance with nature. But in practice, I think the question for us all is, how can this approach usher in a new Caribbean economic development paradigm for the region, and in what ways? Second, it's suggested in the report that the Caribbean is underutilizing its ocean resources, but also that the oceans are overexploited. Ocean and coastal ecosystems are overexploited. So there's a bit of a paradox there. The report points, according to the report, the total value of ocean assets worldwide is over $24 trillion based on the ocean's earning capacities in a variety of industries and services, such as fisheries, tourism, trade, carbon sequestration, and biotechnology. Those resources perhaps underutilized but overexploited. And the idea, I suppose, that ocean-based growth can't be based on more of the same, that business as usual is really not an option. And then finally, the report identifies financing, of course, as one of the main challenges in investing in key blue economy areas such as marine renewable energy, fisheries and aquaculture, marine transportation, and of course that's the topic of our discussion this morning. We're having the discussion on financing the blue economy against a backdrop of consistently sluggish economic growth in the Caribbean, high public debt ratios in many countries, narrow revenue bases, low aid levels, and of course a devastation wreaked most recently by hurricanes Irma and Maria in some parts of the Caribbean point very clearly to the continued vulnerabilities of the region to extreme weather events and other disasters and climate change and so on. And those pressures will only serve to increase pressure on public finance. So, against that backdrop, I suppose, where will the resources come from? The trillion-dollar question, or as my 9-year-old son would say, the gazillion-dollar question. I haven't quite worked out how many zeros are in a gazillion, but it sounds like quite a lot. And, a lot of the investments that the Blue Economy paper points to, of course, don't come cheap. They carry high upfront investment costs, and certainly domestic resources and aid resources won't be sufficient to meet those investment costs. But of course, the title of the report is also a Caribbean development opportunity. And I think the report very much encourages us to think about the new and innovative sources of finance that might be available to help fund new investments in the blue economy. It encourages us to think about the comparative advantages and the possible role of public and private finance providers in meeting the financing the blue economy challenge, and of course the role of alternative and innovative new financing approaches that are gaining in momentum, such as blue bonds, pioneered most recently by the Seychelles, blended finance instruments being utilized very much by multilateral and bilateral development banks, the growing momentum of the impact investment community and the growing interest from investors, not just in investments that will deliver them a financial return, but also in those investments that will deliver social and environmental impacts and benefits as well. So there's very much more diversity and sophistication, I would say, in the international financing landscape. A lot of promise out there, and those opportunities are probably underexplored for the Caribbean. But let me finish there with my opening remarks, and perhaps before I hand over to Dr. Roger McLeod, economist at the Caribbean Development Bank, to kickstart the discussion, let me very quickly introduce our distinguished set of panelists today, here to answer all of those hard questions that I just put to you all. First, to my right, Dr. Eric Deans, who's Chief Executive Officer for the Jamaica Special Economic Zone Authority and the Jamaica Logistics Hub Initiative Task Force. A very good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us. Next, Ms. Tashin Syed, Country Director for the Caribbean countries of the World Bank. A very good morning to you. And finally, Mr. Rob Weary from the Nature Conservancy, who's been doing a lot of work on our debt for nature swaps in small island states worldwide. A very good morning. Thank you for joining us. So without further ado, Dr. McLeod, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Hurley. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. This morning I'll be presenting on the main findings coming out of our recent thematic research paper entitled Financing the Blue Economy, a Caribbean Development Opportunity. This research was prepared by the Economics Department at CDB in conjunction with the UNDP. It was a collaborative effort that we are very thankful for, and hopefully we can build on this for the future. The main motivation behind this research was the fact that our Caribbean economies have a distinct advantage in ocean-based resources. However, we have been unable to fully harness the potential of these resources. And previous studies have noted two main obstacles that have prevented us from fully harnessing this potential. These two obstacles are, firstly, the lack of investments and financing for the blue economy, and to a lesser extent, the absence of a regional body that can champion and implement this process across the Caribbean. As such, we deemed it very important to design a study that steps away from the usual focus of what are the blue economy opportunities and towards a focus on how can we develop new and innovative solutions to solving these two main obstacles. And we believe that this is the step in the right direction, in that we are trying to solve the main issue of financing, as well as the lesser issue of a lack of a institutionalized implementation process going forward. Now, before I get into the presentation itself, let me briefly build on Mrs. Hurley's introduction and try to define what exactly is the blue economy. Now, in 2016, the World Bank defined the blue economy as the sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth, improve the livelihoods and jobs, while preserving the health of marine and coastal ecosystems. In other words, the blue economy approach is about driving economic growth in an environmentally sustainable and socially inclusive manner. And it is important that we do not see the blue economy approach as a departure away from our usual development agenda, but rather an enhancement of our development agenda that no more frontally includes environmental sustainability, as well as improved livelihoods, so that we can build the kind of economic resilience that we would like to see in our Caribbean economies. In this context, the blue economy is about driving the triple bottom line of development. It is about protecting the environment, advancing social well-being, and growing the economy. In doing our research, we identified 4 key sectors that we believe are critically important in advancing the blue economy agenda across the Caribbean. These 4 sectors are fisheries and aquaculture, coastal and marine tourism, marine renewable energy, as well as marine transport and shipping. To advance these sectors, we think that it is very important to have 3 key factors at play. These 3 key factors are, firstly, we would need to have educational workshops and training within coastal communities to build social awareness and critical skills that are needed to close the capacity gap that has plagued our Caribbean economies. Secondly, we need to develop and attract seed investments that can be used to finance the blue economy. And thirdly, the blue economy approach itself would need to be institutionalized and implemented from a regional perspective. Having identified these 4 key sectors, now we want to look at what are the actual financing options that are available to finance these key sectors. Allow me to expand on just a few of the financing options that are listed here. And firstly, I will look at impact bonds. Now, impact bonds are not bonds in the traditional sense. These are bonds that produce results when particular outcomes have been achieved. So in the context of the blue economy, we think we could design impact bonds in such a way that results are delivered from these bonds when particular blue economy development outcomes have been achieved. And we think that these bonds are more suited to those blue economy projects that are, one, firstly, easier to initially fund by the government, and secondly, for which it is easy to show that development outcomes have been achieved. Secondly, I wanted to look on climate funds. Now, this is funding that has gone into supporting climate change adaptation and mitigation globally. Of the past 5 years, about 400 billion has been raised for climate change adaptation and mitigation. Hence, this represents an excellent opportunity for us here in the Caribbean to tailor our climate change projects in such a way that it simultaneously enhances the development of the blue economy approach across the Caribbean. I also wanted to have a look at debt swaps. Now, again, in the context of the blue economy, debt swaps could be designed in such a way that we can exchange debt at a discount for the country's investments in particular blue economy initiatives such as marine conservation and so on. And lastly, I wanted to expand on blue bonds. Now, this is a very important financial instrument which I believe is not widely known across the Caribbean. However, it has been used and it has been developed already and has been used to garner funds for blue economy projects. As Mrs. Hurley mentioned, this was first introduced by Seychelles, and it was very successful in developing seed investments for blue economy projects. And I also have listed here a number of other financing instruments, namely blended financing, mobilizing domestic resources, crowdsourcing or diaspora financing, as well as contingent recoverable grants. Now, the paper itself thoroughly analyzes each financing instruments. It also provides many different examples of how these instruments are presently being used or developed across the Caribbean. And I implore everyone in the audience to have a look whenever they do get a chance. So having established what are the key sectors and what are the key financing instruments that can be used to finance blue economy initiatives across these sectors, I want to now have a look at what are the actual next steps that should be put in place so that we can advance the blue economy agenda across the Caribbean. We think that there needs to be clear and defined roles for the government, development partners, households, and the private sector. And there needs to be great synergy between these key stakeholders so that we can get the kind of efficient research and development as well as monitoring and evaluation that would be needed to really advance the blue economy agenda across the Caribbean and make this an actual success. Now, if you recall, my third key ingredient that was needed to advance our 4 key sectors was that the blue economy agenda would need to be institutionalized and driven from a regional perspective. And this brings me to my slide on ocean management. Now, we strongly believe that the success of the blue economy strategy depends on this concerted and pragmatic approach. And the regional agency for ocean policy can guide the implementation process within the participating countries. And very importantly, it can act as a conduit for communal negotiations to facilitate a collaborative approach for regional blue growth. The paper then closes with some very useful policy recommendations, and I will list some of them here. Firstly, there needs to be a regional policy for economic sharing. There needs to be established a regional agency for ocean management and governance. We need to have some amount of improved business environment and infrastructure. And we also need to have advocacy and participatory development on the part of the household. And we also need to establish a regional knowledge hub that can propel the kind of research and development that is needed to properly vet potential blue economy projects and transform our economies. Now, I'm very hopeful that our heads of governments will be able to champion this effort and fully implement some of these recommendations so that we can build the kind of economic resilience that is needed in our Caribbean countries going forward. Thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Dr. MacLeod, for that excellent overview of some of the report's main findings and recommendations. And as you mentioned there at the end, I think, the report really is a call to action for heads of government, for policymakers, for communities across the Caribbean, for action on the blue economy. So now perhaps let me turn to our distinguished panel of experts and invite some reflections on Dr. MacLeod's presentation from your side. Perhaps I'll turn to you first, Dr. Deans. So, you have substantial experience in the sector of marine transport, of course, which is identified as one of the key sectors for targeted investments and a more sustainable blue economy approach. But from your perspective, what does a blue economy approach mean for the marine transport sector? And then the second question I perhaps wanted to put to you as well, the report also points very much to the importance of the private sector as a key source of finance, of expertise, as a real partner in the blue economy agenda. So perhaps what opportunities exist to involve private sector partners, in particular from the Caribbean region, in the blue economy agenda? Please.
Okay, thank you, Gail. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As the marine transport expert on the panel, it gives me the opportunity to speak about broadening the context of our concept of the blue economy. Typically, when we think of the blue economy, we think of tourism or fishing or other use of the coastal environment. But recognizing that our planet Earth is 75% water, and as small island developing countries, being in contact with that water, we are in contact with literally every other country on the planet. And the marine environment represents an opportunity for us to use that high economic development. So I'll just use a quick case study to answer your question. Just last week, I was in Gansu province in China. And you'd probably ask, why is somebody from Jamaica in northwest China in the Gobi Desert? Well, the reason is, recently the Chinese bought our aluminum plant, and they're shipping the aluminum all the way back to China. The only way that is possible is through marine transport. But recognizing that that is not the most efficient way to produce the final product, which is aluminum, we are looking at how do we get the production back to Jamaica, in other words, make the transportation more efficient so that we produce high-value goods in our special economic zones in the region and ship it a shorter distance to the markets in North America. So when we look at the blue economy as a region, we have to look at it from the perspective that how can we extract the efficiencies of the most cost-efficient means of transportation to allow us to grow our economies and do it in a sustainable manner. Because part of the challenge with shipping these long distances, it also pollutes the environment. Shipping contributes considerably to greenhouse gas emissions. So by reducing the transportation and making it more efficient, we also are helping the environment. But more importantly, by producing the goods in the region, the higher value goods, as opposed to shipping primary commodities, we improve the social sustainability and the opportunities for our people. So that's how some of the ways that I look at the blue economy. And thank you, Gail.
No, thank you very much. I think that's a great way to start. I mean, I think to increase efficiencies in the way of doing business is really yields a triple dividend, I suppose. You yield not only environmental benefits, but you grow jobs, you build competitiveness as well, which is signaled in the report as also an important part of a blue economy approach. So perhaps I can turn now to you, Ms. Syed, from the World Bank. So I think the report is very clear that the Caribbean region needs support from its development partners, from the international financial community, to maximize the opportunities presented by the blue economy. So perhaps the question to you is, what role do you foresee for development partners, the international financial institutions, such as your own, in supporting implementation of some of the report's recommendations, and perhaps in particular that related to the importance of adopting a region-wide approach to the blue economy?
Thank you very much, Ms. Hurley, and a very warm good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or as the Honorable Prime Minister Mitchell says, brothers and sisters. I do want to first congratulate you, Dr. McLeod, for really presenting the synopsis of the report in a highly focused and consolidated manner. So thank you for sharing that. Indeed, the role of the international partners, I would call us all partners in the development process for the Caribbean countries, is extremely important for a variety of reasons. First of all, from the side of the World Bank, and I'm sure your institution as well, Ms. Hurley and others present here, we very much see the blue economy as fundamentally central for the Caribbean region's growth, economic growth. And at the same time, in parallel, opening up opportunities to leverage new sources of financing, especially private sector financing. And I say that because this is a very opportune moment. We always talk, when we sit in the Caribbean, we continuously talk about the challenges and the issues, the natural disasters, the high debt issue, the economic viability of the islands. I really want to turn that conversation to the point that this region sits on top of, or it's not literally on top, but on resources that are expected to generate the greatest number of new jobs by 2030. That's from OECD and World Bank studies, i.e. the blue economy. So it's a question of jobs, it's a question of growth, it's a question of building human capital, it's a question of finally protecting the natural resources and the environment. Hence, the role that we have is, it is a global public good role, not only a role for the Caribbean, and that the first one is helping the countries transition to this blue economy. The second one is really moving towards leveraging public and private financing. So in terms of the first point of transitioning to the blue economy, I do want to mention two statistics which were in our report. Before the CDB report, about a year and a half ago, the World Bank also had a more of, not so much focused on financing, but broader report called Towards the Blue Economy, a Promise for Sustainable Growth in the Caribbean, which we presented to the CARICOM last July in 2017. And in terms of our assessment, over $400 billion of gross revenue was generated from the Caribbean Sea as a whole in 2012. For the small islands, over $45 billion is generated annually. US dollars I'm talking about in both cases. So hence there's a very important economic imperative on further harnessing, as you said, Dr. McLeod, the ocean resources. Moreover, in terms of a key factor which I'm sure is at the minds of most of our prime ministers and government is employment and jobs. Indirectly or indirectly, 2 million jobs are created or supported through the blue economy in the small island states. Hence, the transitional aspect is critical. From the World Bank side, the second part on leveraging public and private financing and international financing, we are at the moment right now engaged with Grenada, where we are sitting in the island of Grenada, to support a very interesting and innovative engagement, which is a combination of looking at the fiscal issues of resilience and the environmental, climate change, and the blue economy related issues of resilience. We're calling it a Blue Growth Development Policy Credit, which is going to our board for approval in the next few weeks, actually. And the first one ever that we are doing in this region, where we are bringing together two elements, the fiscal resilience side and the environmental and ocean resilience. And I do want to end by saying that we consider the role of the blue economy and the ocean sector and the maritime and coastal sectors as one of the four core areas of a multidimensional approach to resilience. I think yesterday we heard Prime Minister Mitchell talk about that in a very, very articulate and focused manner. We heard the CDB President, Dr. Smith, talk about it. And I just want to mention that the four key areas we think that are central, because we do see the discussion not just solely on the blue economy, but part of the four legs, if there can be four legs of a stool. Normally there are three legs to a stool or four legs to a table. One is, of course, the fiscal and financial resilience side. The second is the physical side of resilience infrastructure. The third is the human capital, the social capital, the human and social capital resilience. And the fourth really is the climatic, the environmental, the ocean resources. So the four key elements are the ones that we believe is where the international development community can bring value to the region based on our experience and engagement in other parts of the world, and can leverage the private sector financing. Honestly speaking, I do want to say that there isn't a dearth of financing. It's really helping in creating the right enabling environment of now ocean governance, apart from other governance areas, to bring in, to rope in private sector financing through the variety of innovative instruments that you mentioned, Dr. McLeod. I'm sure my colleague is going to talk more about that. So
thank you very much, Ms. Syed. And you talked about the importance of leveraging a much wider range of public and private financing in support of the blue economy, which I think will be critical to success in this area. But of course, how do you do that in practice? But I think, I'm really encouraged. I see a lot of really exciting stuff already going on within the Caribbean and outside the Caribbean when it comes to new and innovative financing approaches. I mean, you mentioned your work with the World Bank just there, but we're also working as UNDP with the government on Grenada to develop a proposal for the world's first blue economy social impact bond. Dr. McLeod mentioned a wide range of innovative financing instruments that could potentially be tapped in support of the blue economy in the report, such as blue bonds, debt for nature swaps, which is an area you, Mr. Weary, have been involved in. Fiji has been the world's first small island state to recently issue a green bond in support of renewable energy there. So there is a lot happening in this space. So perhaps to hear from you, Mr. Weary, about your experiences of this innovative finance space and what are some of the opportunities which could be better maximized by the Caribbean, but also perhaps on what the limitations and constraints are. Help us to understand perhaps, how much represents genuine opportunity versus some of the hype would be fantastic.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for the opportunity to be here, especially the Caribbean Development Bank, and good morning everyone. And also like to thank the Caribbean Development Bank for putting together a very nice report and the nice presentation. Obviously parts of it really resonated well for me, given that my focus is on, for those of you who know me, debt for nature swaps, and also on other innovative finance mechanisms. Blue bonds have also been supporting the Seychelles in both of those. For the Nature Conservancy, the blue economy, the portion of that really resonates with us. Our mission, of course, is biodiversity protection in the land and seas where it exists. And so, coming out of the Rio Plus 20 meeting 6 years ago, when the blue economy was first put forward by the small island developing states, the specific activities that resonated for us and that we wanted to work with countries to help them to achieve those specific sustainable development goals were around improving fisheries management, improving coral reef management, and adapting to climate change. And for us, that's from the nature side. And we wanted to be able to address those in a holistic fashion. And so we saw the debt for nature swaps, debt conversions, debt restructuring, we're going to use those terms somewhat interchangeably, as a vehicle for doing that. And more importantly, the ocean governance part of it is key as well, as was identified in the report by the CDB. And so how we did that, and the first example of this was the debt swap we concluded in the Seychelles a little over 2 years ago. We used a marine spatial planning process that was led by the government, but we provided the science part of it and led the stakeholder involvement. And this is a very science-based, stakeholder-driven mechanism. And the idea is basically to create a equivalent of a land use plan for the ocean and bring in all of the stakeholders who use the ocean. So for the case of the Seychelles, you have maritime transportation, you have commercial fisheries, semi-industrial, artisanal, tourism sector. Seychelles, 60% of GDP is tourism, 30% fisheries. So obviously those are key sectors. And basically we went through 20 plus workshops over 2+ years and identified how to really mitigate conflict and identify where the appropriate use is and where is multiple use and whatnot. And you succeed in one of those plans if you, at the end of the day, everybody leaves a little unhappy, because you can never get 100% of what you want. But if sitting around the table, you leave and you get 80% of what you want, and you see everybody else as well had to give, you feel it's a fair plan, and that's really what you want at the end of the day. So we look at that as the policy leg of this. And then the debt conversion that we did there as one of the financing arms of that, the blue bond that was issued by the Seychelles is an additional financing arm. We're looking at even adding to that there in the Seychelles with an additional blue enterprise fund, a 50 million euro fund to add into the funds being created through the the blue bond that they're issuing. And then, so that's some of the examples of the financing arm. And then there's the governance arm. And the governance arm of this was then a trust fund set up in the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust, which has both government and civil society represented on the board, and including private sector. To give you an example, there's 9 seats on the board, 4 from government, from Fisheries Ministry, Finance Ministry, Natural Resources, and then we sit on the board. There's 2 other seats for local civil society entities, and then the Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Hotel Tourism Association, so we bring in the private sector. And so that is the entity that is in managing the cash flow from the debt conversion and also from the blue bonds. 3 million of the 15 million being raised is going to that trust to be dispersed for grants for implementing a new fisheries management plan and also to support the new marine protected areas. And the Seychelles really took a big leap of faith with this as well. They've committed to putting 30% of their exclusive economic zone into marine protected areas, half in no-take. And science clearly shows that's really 100% of the marine area needs to be managed. But at least these are the key areas where the mangroves and the coral reefs are. And they're important because that's what, if you're a tourist, where do you want to go snorkel and dive? You want to go where you're going to see reefs and where you're going to see fish. And Mother Nature recovers incredibly fast in these no-take areas. You get a doubling, a tripling of biodiversity, doubling, tripling of biomass. So you're going to go to these places and they become fish factories. They're going to support the fisheries. They're going to be a great place for tourists to go. So we're looking to replicate that. Obviously, I make it sound easy, but it took 4 years to do that deal. We've been having discussions here for a number of years with Grenada. We're hoping to replicate that here. The tricky part, though, is, to be honest, to align all of the enabling factors. Finding debt we can buy at a discount, can't always do that. Getting the government buy-in, including the expansion of the protected area system, creating a trust fund that everybody is happy with, that it represents the civil society, raising the funds, and that's the part where we're finding there's not a lack of private funds out there. We've been talking to lots of investment banks. They're very excited about this. It's how do we de-risk that? And so that's where the legs of the World Bank come in. We're working with the World Bank for a loan guarantee. And so getting all those pieces to align is really the tricky part, to be honest.
No, thank you so much, Mr. Weary. And I'm really pleased you mentioned those words. It's sometimes not easy. There's a lot of exciting stuff going on, and certainly a lot to learn from other countries' experiences. But as you mentioned, it's sometimes not easy. It takes time. Some of these financing approaches are new and perhaps not well understood. And I think the report points very clearly that one area which needs to be looked at over the coming years is really the area of capacity at all levels. Capacity to design and implement, high quality, blue economy oriented projects, to understand different financing instruments and models, education and awareness. So perhaps a question that I'll throw out to all of you is, how can we all collectively work to strengthen capacity on the blue economy in the Caribbean? But also, Mr. Weary, you talked about, the financing is available. And there is a lot of excitement and interest, I think, in the Caribbean and the blue economy opportunities. But some of that financing, at what cost is it currently available? Perceptions of risk, information asymmetries on the investor and investee side, and increase financing costs and perhaps make those investments unaffordable. So how can we help to more effectively de-risk some of these blue economy investments, especially in a context in which some of these investments will be vulnerable to extreme weather events or other phenomena, coral bleaching events, for instance, as well? So thinking creatively about how we can address some of those risks practically and build that high-quality project pipeline. Who perhaps wants to come in on some of those issues around, de-risking financing costs, but also the crucial issue of capacity development for the region? Dr. Deans, maybe?
Yes, let me speak a bit on capacity. Robert spoke about the tourism sector and the fishery sector, like in the Seychelles. And if you don't consider the industrial aspects and those impacts that it will have on tourism or fisheries. Right now, plastics are degrading our beaches, our rivers, or fisheries. It's affecting our tourism product. Now, if we do not look at the industries which we are bringing into our economies that are causing those impacts and pollution, we will be fighting a losing battle. So from our perspective, from the marine transport side, we look at the industries which are sustainable. So an industry like the aluminum industry, aluminum is 100% recyclable. It can replace a lot of the plastic containers which are ending up polluting our ecosystems. We produce bauxite and aluminum in our region. It's a resource that we are rich in Guyana, in Jamaica. So we tie the two together. So if we start, one of the other things that I do is logistics. And logistics is the management of supply chains. And by analyzing and mapping supply chains, we can identify the opportunities where we can integrate our industries into these supply chains, create opportunities for our small and medium-sized investors to act as suppliers in these global supply chains, and reduce environmental impacts. By looking particularly for the environmental impacts, we create the benefits to the other sectors of the economy. But what we're not seeing is that the capacity to understand these issues are not being developed. How do we explain to somebody the link between producing a particular product and tourism? How do we educate our young people to see that there are opportunities, not just in just getting a job in the tourism sector, but doing something that will benefit the economy and benefit themselves as a business? So in terms of some of these innovative financing mechanisms, they must not only extend to what we call fisheries or these type of activities, but other activities that have a impact also on the other aspects of the economy. So in terms of capacity building, we have to look at it in a broader context. We have to look at how can we diversify the economies of the region beyond just basic types of activities, beyond basic agriculture, beyond just tourism where most of the profits go overseas, to diversifying economies using our resources, whether they be the resources in the ocean or the resources which are transported over the ocean. And to that extent, we need to see more innovative ways of how we finance that. And one way I am proposing is setting up, say, an equity fund, whereby some of these funds which are available can be used to finance young entrepreneurs who have mapped these supply chains, found opportunities, but do not have the access to the resources to allow them to get into those businesses. So what I'm saying is, let us be truly innovative in looking at how we finance this blue economy, and don't just think of it in terms of just the ocean.
Let me talk a bit on the capacity point, which is at a personal level a very sensitive issue for me, because I think this is such a central part, especially for the small island states. What I wanted to share with the audience here and with our panel is that when we talk about capacity in the Caribbean in relation to the various areas that the public sector is implementing, or where the private sector wants to come in and there are constraints, or the projects that we as development partners are contributing to, we're discussing capacity in relation to a particular area, a particular sector. But for the blue economy aspect, there are two additional dimensions to the challenge or the battle for capacity building. One is, excuse me, the multi-sectorality of it, which the report also mentions. It's a multi-sectoral dimension. The second is the geographic scope. As you said, Dr. Dean, that the ocean connects everyone. It's transboundary. Hence, it's not a single country discussion. And that's where the regional dimension comes in, I think, in a very strong way. From the World Bank side, a very, I would say, a drop in the ocean effort is being made. We secured about $6 million or so of grant financing from the Global Environmental Facility to support the development of an Eastern Caribbean regional ocean policy, which is being implemented through the OECS. I mention this because I do believe that in fora such as this, when we have a political highest level participation and representation, and also of the multilateral and bilateral agencies, amongst others, it is very important to highlight that without higher level political consensus and alignment, the battle for capacity on the blue economy will not be won, because the regional dimension is absolutely central in terms of the ocean governance, in terms of the policies, the maritime sector that you refer to very, very clearly. So I wanted to put this on the table and make a plea that, again, I will repeat, the issue really is not the lack of financing. I think the financing can be mobilized. There's financing on the table already, just from the World Bank side. Our concessional financing window, which is IDA, International Development Association, at zero interest rate, has almost quadrupled for 5 of the Caribbean countries, including 4 of the OECS island countries, which means that in the next 3 years, on an average, $70 million of almost equivalent to grants is available for these countries. We were able to mobilize additional $50 million grant financing for Dominica by asking our board to convert the concessional financing to a grant. So there is appetite for that, but let's not have that appetite come in only as a consequence of a natural disaster. And I do believe that there can be a systematic approach on this if elements at the country level are also addressed, such as more focus on fiscal side, which Grenada and some of the other island countries are doing, meaning saving in good times in order to be able to manage the bad times better, which means handling issues such as, I think you raised a very good point on the issue of plastics. We have a report that we'll hopefully unfurl very soon in the region. It's on marine pollution, and it's really titled Not a Minute to Lose, or something like that. It's a very catchy title. But I will share, if I have the time, I can share 2 key statistics from that.
Very quickly.
Okay, one is that for the Caribbean broader area, there's per square kilometers over 200,000 pieces of plastic per square kilometer in the ocean. In the small island coastal areas, there are over about, I think the data is about 2,000 or so per square, per kilometer, not square, per kilometer of pieces that are found of litter, as opposed to close to 600 pieces of litter in other coastal areas. So the issue is very, very serious just on one part of it.
No, the issue of plastics is huge. It's the next major battle, perhaps. But, I also see in that area so much more political commitment and momentum to move. You want to come in very quickly?
Yeah, on the financing part, since my colleagues here spoke on the capacity part. So, when we did the Seychelles deal, the Nature Conservancy, we've financed it off of our balance sheet. We put in $15.2 million and raised $5 million in grant money. And then I was asked by our organization for future deals that we do it off our balance sheet and with other people's money. So we've had to spend the last couple of years, working through how to do that. And What we have found is that, as I mentioned, there's a lot of the private banks we've been speaking to, the commercial banks are very interested in providing these funds. And when you can get credit enhancement from the likes of the World Bank or from MIGA, you can raise the capital, because these are basically AAA rated entities, at maybe 100 basis points over what the World Bank would raise money at. So you're talking 10-year money at 2.5%, so maybe 3% now with rising interest rates, in euros even cheaper. And so, and as well, we figured out ways to do this. So, in not all cases, if you're using a World Bank loan guarantee, the country has to raise the money directly. But with a MIGA guarantee, for example, you could create an LLC that's off balance sheet and raises the capital. And so you could finance a lot of these deals so the government, because we know governments already have, especially in this region, have high debt loads. And so you could raise the capital, and we're doing this in the Seychelles with this Blue Enterprise Fund, where it would be off balance sheet 50 million euros to go to the Seychelles Development Bank. And in passing it through the trust we create, even if we can raise that money, we can pass it through the trust and add 2% on, which creates additional cash flow for the marine protected areas. And even lending it on to the Seychelles Development Bank at 5%, their cost of capital is 9%. And so they could either use that money to restructure some of their existing capital that they've brought in, or use it to invest in blue economy mechanisms, small, medium enterprises, to come back to the example of the need for that. And they're cash starved. And so this is something that could be replicated here. So there are ways to bring in very cheap capital, working with the private sector, working with the credit enhancement that's available from multilaterals, and using alternative structures. But at the end of the day, finding the projects to invest in the end is where then the capacity is important.
No, absolutely, thank you. I mean, I think to the finance ministry officials in the room, opportunities to mobilize funds off balance sheet or do stuff with other people's money is certainly bound to appeal. And I think, that the opportunities are out there to mobilize new resources from new partners using new instruments. I think some of the opportunities to broaden the reach to the impact investment community probably haven't been explored widely, especially for some of the initiative that you mentioned, Dr. Dean, to perhaps support entrepreneurship in the region. That would be an area which would seem to me ripe for interest from the impact investment community. So what I heard from that was, very much that a whole of economy and a region-wide approach would be key to maximizing the opportunities of a blue economy approach to development in the region. I'm very conscious of the time. I'm not sure if this is correct here at the front, 35 minutes to go. But I would like to have an interactive discussion and feedback from all of you. But very quickly, before I hand over to our audience, I'd like our panelists to perhaps in less than 1 minute answer the question. So the following question. Fast forward 10 years from now, and what does success in the blue economy look like to you in the Caribbean? Dr. Deans.
There's an ancient Chinese philosopher who said, if you don't change your direction, you'll end up where you're going. And in the Caribbean, we have been going on a particular path for the last decades and centuries. And I hope by applying these sustainable principles to the blue economy, we will reach a different destination.
Thank you. Ms. Syed?
Since we are in the business of quoting sayings, I don't know if it was Einstein or who said, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That ain't going to happen. So I'm actually going to go to something more micro. Of course, we have a whole issue of sustainability, mobilizing financing. I think if this region, my element of success would be, you said 10 years? In 10 or 20?
Sure, you choose. 20 is good too, if you want to be even more visionary.
No, I want to be 10 because I want to see results. I want to be alive when it happens. No. It's really the battle of solid waste plastics and reducing the numbers that I was quoting by even 30% 40% would be great, but I would say, honestly, not a minute to waste on that. For me, it will be that when the research is done by the World Bank 10 years later, we don't find 2,000 pieces per kilometer on the coastal side, but they're reduced by half maybe, and in the oceans, there's reduction.
No, solid waste, plastics, I mean, they're game changers, really, if we get them right and get them right quickly, I think. Mr. Weary.
Sure. For me, I've been working for the Nature Conservancy for 20 years in this region, which is hard to believe. And 10 years ago, in 2008, worked with the government of Grenada and the government of Bahamas to launch the Caribbean Challenge Initiative. And we're 10 years in. It had two tenets, that they would expand marine protected areas to 20% and create sustainable finance mechanisms. I thought by now we would be much further along. I'm realizing now it's at least a 2-decade project, but what we're finding now is through these debt conversions and blue bonds that we finally can, I think, achieve this vision, go beyond the 20%, see the whole ocean better managed, and then beyond that, use these mechanisms not only for debt conversions for these blue enterprise funds, but there's huge other infrastructure needs. The Rocky Mountain Institute put a report out end of last year that said for a $2.4 billion investment, they can take all 9 Eastern OECS countries and territories to 70% renewables. It's not a huge number. It's something that's very doable. And then beyond that, 90% of the sewage here in the Caribbean goes straight into the ocean untreated. So the countries are making commitments to better manage their oceans, but we need to deal with that. It's a public health issue. It's not good for the reefs. It could also address the freshwater issue. You go to tertiary treatment, you can put that back in. So my vision is that we figure out how to create a regional investment fund that can address all of these infrastructure needs, debt restructuring, small, medium enterprise investment funds, and so hopefully in the next decade we can get there.
Thank you so much, and I'd like to thank all of our panelists and also Dr. MacLeod for their insightful presentations. And I think that, what's clear is that there are multiple challenges, but there's already a lot of really exciting work already starting or gaining in momentum that we can build on. And the blue economy approach, I think, is really about building a positive narrative and vision for the region moving forward.
Sorry,
but
I have a two-hander.
You have a two-hand?
Yes. Can I just wanted to mention that, you referred to the whole partnership of the governments, the private sector, the international community. I think the critical centerpiece of all of this is the communities and the people and the public awareness on that front.
Absolutely.
Just wanted to mention that.
No, thank you for that reminder. I'd now like to turn it over to our audience and also encourage our audience to perhaps ask our expert panelists some questions about some of the remarks that they've made, but also encourage you when you're posing your question to perhaps also tell us, for you 10 years from now, after you've made your question, for you 10 years from now, what does success in the blue economy look like for you? Because I think that will really be helpful for us all working in this agenda to pool ideas and brainstorm and think about, what are the priorities and action areas moving forward. So please do introduce yourself when you make your question. Please go ahead,
Greetings.
sir.
Thank you very much, Gail, and kudos to the panelists. Couple comments, just the fantastic presentation by Dr. MacLeod. I think you really covered the waterfront across a number of areas. I think in your list of issues, the most important is the enabling environment. You get that right, and all these other boxes get checked. Clearly, there needs to be a regional approach. You need scale, size matters, and that's been the issue in the Caribbean. You need a regional approach, and you need the private sector. And that's all going to come together with the enabling environment. I've been involved with aquaculture financing for, 20 years. We were financing shrimp farms in Ecuador and Nicaragua, and I think today, and Chile. I think today the issue is, as Dr. Dean said, is you really have to change direction. Renewables and the areas noted are there, but the capacity for enhancing communication, this is all at low cost, enhancing communication, enhancing fuel. Seaweed can be a fantastic food source, a fertilizer, and yet, and so it's something that's not extracting, but it's actually expanding. It's looking at the glass very differently. And so I think the potential there, and the amount of liquidity that's out there is phenomenal. We're in the most affluent period in the history of finance, and it's a matter of bringing about that differentiator, finding that social impact angle. So I think we're on the cusp of, and in 10 years, I think we're going to, between the digitalization, high-tech period we're in right now, and the recognition that we've run out of resources, climate change is going to be, the issue. The carbon extract of underwater farming is 10 times greater than trees above ground. So I think in 10 years we're going to see tremendous, the next Googles and Amazons and Apples are going to be in this sector. Fingers crossed that the governments get it right and that the enabling environment is put in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think, thank you in particular for highlighting there at the end the issue of technology, which I don't think we actually picked up on in our discussion. So perhaps in the first round of Q&A, our panelists might like to respond to at that point in particular. Please, sir.
Hi, I'm James Hospitalis, the Executive Director of Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARFA. I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, and I would spend some holidays on our southeast beaches, Mayaro and Manzanilla. And the saying, we would go as kids to pull in the net, and if you got a good catch, they would give you one. As the years have gone by, those sayings come in more and more empty, and the beaches have tar on them that stain your feet. And I traveled all over the Caribbean. I went to medical school in Jamaica. My father-in-law is from Barbados, and that environmental degradation is everywhere. When we go to Mayaro now, I don't like it. My wife has to spend the first hour with a big garbage bag collecting all the plastic waste in front of just the 100 yards or so that is the house you have rented. So the trajectory we're on is not good. We're not being good stewards, neither at national level, regional, global level. So 10 years from now, I hope that there's some shift in that attitude, and that would be the number. There isn't that awakening yet. To get that kind of change is going to take people working together, not just building back better, but building back better by working better together. And my question is for Rob. When you did Seychelles, can you dig into the dynamics around building the partnership within the government, between the government and the others? How did you mitigate the conflict? How did you, just dig, because that's the key. It's people working together. It's not organizations working together. It's people with all our imperfections, if we're to save this planet. I'm a physician, and I think there needs to be an alliance between those who care about people and those who care about the planet. Because on those two things are predicated successful economy of any kind. So I'm listening, and I'm still curious about this blue economy because of the degradation that I witness and the climate change that you see unfolding. I don't see yet what you're talking about, actually. Sorry. But my question is to you, Rob, because whether or not I see it, to go forward, we must work together in different ways.
Well, thank you very much. I think that the issue that it's a collective effort, no one party actor has all the answers is really important. Please go ahead, sir.
Yes, my name is Douglas Liz. I'm the General Counsel of the Green Climate Fund. And I want to be part of the solution here because our institution is a new institution, new kid on the block as an international organization. And we do have innovative forms of financing, which we don't think the Caribbean is readily availing itself of the opportunities presented by the Green Climate Fund. And unlike the traditional multilateral sources of financing, we offer loans, guarantees, equity, and grants. And within that window, we are able to finance different kind of projects and get around the so-called middle income classification, which the Caribbean is associated with. I speak specifically of instances where we are now financing, for instance, a geothermal energy project in Indonesia. And those projects are highly risky and are high-risk projects where the private sector is reluctant to come in because of the losses which could probably be associated if they don't strike the right volume of geothermal energy. Well, we were able to go into that project with a combination of grants and guarantees where we subordinated ourselves to the different explorers. As I speak now, contracts are being signed for drilling. And when that process is completed, if it is successful, we will get back our grant. It's what we call a recoverable grant. If it's unsuccessful, then we would write it off. We are able to do that because unlike the traditional development banks, we don't have to show a return on capital to shareholders. We don't go in the bond markets. Our source of finances is from pledging from the developed countries to meet the Paris Agreement objectives. So we are able to assist countries in ways which the traditional development banks cannot assist those countries. We are active in the Caribbean, but we'd like to be more active. We now we're going through the Caribbean Development Bank and we go through the CCCs, and we recently had the Department of Environment accredited as one of these institutions in Antigua. But we want more. We want to work with our development banks because in that way we can give you the grant money to build capacity, project readiness, etc., whereby you would be able to access the resources without the traditional conditions which are associated with the traditional development bank. So the little time I have left here, I would like to meet as much of you as possible so we can get you started on the process of what we call accreditation, because we work through accredited entities. As I said, on the regional sphere, we work with the CDB and 5Cs. But on the national sphere, we'd like to work more with your development banks so we can channel the funds into the development banks so that you can build the capacity, we can give you the grants, we can give you the guarantees, and we have no restrictions on that. So that's my contribution to the debate this morning. And with their question as to the 10-year horizon, in fact, one of my mandates from my private sector personnel is, Douglas, when you go to the Caribbean, find a hotel chain for me in which we can strike a partnership with them and we can build a green hotel. So I am at the moment seeking a hotel chain to get into dialogue with us so we can build this green hotel so that in 10 years' time we will have a model of which the Caribbean will be proud. And we can replicate that through different institutions. Thank you very much.
Super, thank you. Well, you heard it straight from the horse's mouth. He's the man with the money. He's offering you all his money. So you'd be mad to not take him up on it. So I think, sir, you'll have a long line of people wanting to see you after this session. Okay, perhaps we'll take these two colleagues here before I then go back to the panel for some reactions. Please, sir.
Okay, Guy Joseph, Minister of Economic Development, St. Lucia. We are ready to build a hotel in St. Lucia, so I will definitely take you up on the offer to meet with you after. We really want to be hopeful about the presentations being made here. But I'm a bit skeptical because initially, when the issue of global warming and the CO2 emissions came in, there was all that discussion about the carbon credits and the carbon bank and what would have happened and how it would have benefited the region. We have not seen the evidence, or if it's there, I have not seen it at least, that we've been able to cash in on these carbon credits and all that was promised. So I have to ask, is that another pitch at the Caribbean as to something that we may not really realize? Because we have to go back and convince our countries, our people, that this is something that is worthwhile, it is going to work. And then they are going to tell us, well, look here, at COP in Paris, what was promised, in Morocco, what was promised. Have we seen the materialization of any of these? Because it is challenging for the islands even to be able to meet the requirements, the demands of these, the bar that is set to even attain access to some of these. It may not even happen in our lifetime, because that is the challenge that we are faced. So we want to deal with the plastic problems. We want to be able to deal with the issues pertaining to the ocean, the sewage treatment facilities. But already, as small countries, our debt to GDP is beyond the rate that it ought to be. And it's a question of survival. When you are there, what do you do first? As a government, as a sitting government. And that's the reality that we are faced with in terms of being able to make these decisions. I heard about the statement about 400 million has been raised, 400 billion towards that is to be accessed for climate, for resilience, for rebuilding. But the hurricanes are coming every year. And if we don't attend to it, so what we find ourselves doing is more responding to the situations than being able to build the resilience that is required. So while I look at the proposals on the blue economy, I ask what happened to the green economy, what happened to the climate fund, the carbon credits that we should have been able to cash in. Because if we look at this Caribbean region, our contribution to global warming is minimal. And if we were to do all of the adaptation that is required, we still cannot change the outcome for ourselves. It depends on other people and their behavior, and at the same time, it makes it difficult for us. So if all of us become 100% green, and the other first world countries do nothing about their own situation, it's not going to change the hurricanes that are coming our way. It's not going to change. We have to adopt our behavior to do the necessaries. But our greatest need now is mitigation and the ability to build sufficiently to mitigate against the future catastrophes that we are going to face in this region. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Patricia Shako. I'm the director for the Eastern Caribbean for the Nature Conservancy. There are a lot of past colleagues in this room for me. I consider myself a development practitioner. In my career, I've worn a number of hats. I worked with the World Bank as staff, CDB as staff, IDB as staff, and I got to a point where in my own career analysis, I said, I think a piece is missing. And I would like to throw out a challenge to this group that civil society plays a role in the holistic development of solutions for our region. And I know many times people think, oh, civil society, we will do a consultation, we will set up a room and there will be snacks and we will pander to them for a day and then we will go on for our business. But civil society also encompasses think tanks, academia, universities, and I challenge our development brothers and sisters to look at holistic solutions. As Dr. Dean said, it's not just one aspect. When we look at logistics, when we look at resources, are we looking at just tourism, or are we looking at all the things that feed up into development? And I'm hopeful. We had set some goals for 2020, and I think as a function of getting older, time is speeding up. 2020 seemed like a long, long way away. Now it's 18 months away, but we can set new goals. And I think by bringing people together to bring a holistic solution to the region, we can solve things. I rode the Green Globe certification. I was a GHG auditor. I was all into the carbon markets and thought, you know what, this threw up a wall. I am very, very hopeful that the blue economy wave, no pun intended, will take us where we need to go in our region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think it's certainly good to end on such a positive and hopeful note. I'm all for that. And I hear you on the time speeding up thing. No, thank you to everyone for such, a wide and rich range of comments from the floor. I mean, to me, one recurrent theme is, no one actor can do this alone. I heard the importance of a regional approach, the importance of a collective effort, civil society and think tanks, communities need to be involved. International action to tackle climate change will be an essential part of this. It's all part of the same idea. This is part of a bigger picture. So perhaps some reflections from you on that. And then secondly, this idea of, again, the private sector, it's a wash with liquidity. The money's there. We've had some great offers of some money, so I think that should certainly be put in the minutes from the meeting. But, again, that the opportunities are there to mobilise more finance. And how can that be done perhaps at scale? Because I think for some finance providers, a key challenge is, and it increases transaction costs and it increases the cost of finance, is that some of these investments are not to scale sometimes in small economies. So perhaps some thoughts around that. Perhaps ladies first, this time, Ms. Syed.
Thank you. I do want to address a point that in your roundup summary you didn't mention, but you mentioned earlier, and I should have raised it because that's a key, I think, issue, and that's the question of disruptive technologies and how technology, I think that's critical part of the agenda for the blue economy as well. And in fact, just before the seminar, I was talking to Mr. Friday on this, Angus Friday on this point. Honestly, the opportunity, we were a month ago, some of us in the senior management team of the World Bank sent to Silicon Valley by our president. He's very, very keen that the World Bank needs to embrace much sharply and practically the opportunities for development that are coming from technology. So we were at Google and Facebook. Somebody mentioned Google and Facebook and others, and Kursara University. And my vision kept coming. I kept seeing ocean, and I kept seeing how, something like Project Moon from Google and others can be used very, very systematically to address some of the issues that are highlighted in your report and in our own Blue Economy report as well. So what I'm suggesting is that if the regional engagement through the good offices of the CARICOM or more locally for the OECS side through the OECS Commission, there can be some commitment to really focus attention on the areas that we are looking at, including financing, including reduction of or protection of the marine and coastal environment. It'll be something practical because honestly, yes, the entire world is responsible, accountable, and more the countries that are developed for the issues we are facing on climate change. But let's try to do what we can in our own home, so to speak. And I think the plea I'm making is if there can be a regional organization with teeth on these elements, that will be great. On your other points, I think on the financing aspects, the options of financing are both from the international community as well as beyond the private sector, the banks that you mentioned, private investors. Again, the question here is really the bankable kind of projects that can be put on the table to attract private sector financing. I'm talking about really mainstream private sector financing, because again, this area would be very interesting for them.
Thank you. Dr. Deans, you want to come in here?
Yes. I just want to say that the easiest things to finance are the things that don't cost anything. There's a role for government, there's a role for private sector, there's a role for civil society. Government can take action like banning single-use plastics. We see that being done in Europe. That would have a tremendous impact on the ocean environment. But we can't just simplistically just ban plastics because they serve a very important use. We have to look at funding recycling activities, funding young entrepreneurs who come up with innovative ideas. There's a company, a group of young entrepreneurs in Jamaica who won a global prize recently by using plastics to make building materials. They won a prize in Utah. And taking it the next step, going towards creating industrial clusters in the region where we utilize the resources to serve a global market. And those opportunities will be opportunities for the private sector. So we speak about the challenges of governments with their debt and so on. But the private sector, through these opportunities, can tap into these funds with viable projects. So let us bring all the players, let us bring in civil society who are being impacted, who are having the social impacts of crime and lack of opportunity. By creating opportunities, creating the mechanism, and bringing it all together.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to address the question about the conflict mitigation, because I think that's key. For the Seychelles, the success was government ownership of the project and of the marine spatial plan and the commitment to hit the 30% goal with half and no take. Because at the end of the day, that is policy. It has to be implemented by government, and government has to own it. But there's different ways you can go about, creating that policy. You can do it in a back room and then say, here it is, and that's not the way to do it, of course. The only way you're going to get buy-in of all of the stakeholders is to have multiple consultations, so in the Seychelles, over a couple of years, we had at least 20 plus consultations, and sometimes certain stakeholders won't come to those consultations. The fishing community, especially the artisanal fishing community, for a variety of reasons, they need to go out and make a living. And so you have to go to them and talk to them. And we also realize that if you are creating no-take areas, the science is very clear that after 3 years, you get a really good rebound in the no-take area, doubling, tripling of biomass, doubling, tripling of biodiversity. But there is that period of time where a place where someone might have been able to fish, they can't fish anymore. And so it's for that very reason that our initial grants that are being issued from the debt conversion are focused around fisheries improvement. And why the Seychelles Blue Bond that they issued, the $12 million is going into the Seychelles Development Bank as a revolving fund for improving fisheries and fishers. So being able to upgrade to different types of equipment to be able to improve their storage capacity and things like that. And also why half the grant money is also going to fisheries management plan and whatnot. And we also are fixing a mistake we made in the design of the trust board. Nobody from the fishing community is represented. There's 2 seats for civil society, and we're now assigning one of those permanently to fishing associations so that they have a voice on the board and where the decisions are made. But beyond that, we can look at making resources available for potentially retraining fishermen. If you're going to create new protected areas, you're going to need park wardens, and there's potentially more tourism opportunities. So you could retrain them they already know boats, they know the ocean, they could potentially be trained to be park wardens, or even to work in tourism sector. So you just have to be, it takes time, and you have to just find the people, get them to come to you. If they don't come to you, you go to them. and even find their peers. You know, what we have found often with artisanal fishermen is if you can take them to other places where no takes are, and they can hear from the other fishermen their experiences of how it was before and after, and how they even then said to their governments, we want more no-take areas, then that's more powerful than somebody like me telling the fishermen that this is what they're going to see at the end of the day. So you have to approach it at all of those different levels and be thoughtful.
Thanks very much. Okay, so we have a few more minutes left, and I'm very happy to invite a very brief final round of questions and comments. I'd particularly like to encourage our very exceptional women in the audience to please come and ask a question or make a comment. But yeah, if you could make it brief, and then I'll hand over to our panelists for any very brief and final wrap-up. So come on, ladies.
There's a gentleman at the back.
Yes, please, sir.
Sorry to disappoint you, I'm not a lady. Hi, Gail, how are you doing? Let me thank you for the panel. And as Tassina said, a presentation was made to the heads of government on the blue economy last year. I also took particular note of what the minister from St. Lucia said. If you want this thing to succeed, you have to build in capacity building. You just have to. These countries are bombarded with so many different things at the same time, and the capacity is not there. I'm hearing, and I accept it, because Tassina and I have had a discussion on that, the need for a regional capacity in that area. I will tell you right now that the Secretariat, which I have the honor of leading, has absolutely no capacity in that area right now. So I have to start thinking about building capacity there to start with, because it starts from there if you want to build a regional capacity elsewhere by way of some sort of agency. So whatever we do, we have to build into this, building capacity, and not just at the regional level, because you can build capacity at the regional level, and if there's not a capacity at the national level to receive what is being offered, you have a challenge. We started at the Climate Change Center more than close to 20 years ago. It was a project, first funded, I believe, by the OAS and then the World Bank. We got no time of day at the beginning. The capacity wasn't there at the national level to even receive what we were saying. A lot of time was spent on working with the member states in trying to get them receptive, trying to build capacity. So that's all I want to leave with you. I am willing to do what has to be done. I have no capacity, and the member states are probably in the equal footing. Mr. Dean, I think, no, Mr. Weary mentioned they've been working in Grenada for 8 years. Perhaps that's how long it takes. I was telling a colleague this morning, Stephen, that sometimes you start working on something, you don't get frustrated. In my business, I can't get frustrated too fast. You just have to recognize that you have to build in some certain things to ensure that the policy can translate into action. I just want to leave that thought with you and say thank you very much. I'm heading to the airport, so I won't be able to get the response.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. And, you know, I think capacity has been a recurrent theme, and I think perhaps us as development partners, you know, we all struggle with our own internal capacity on some of these issues too, and maybe we can do more to pool our capacities in this area as well. Very quick and very brief final input. Yes, please, madam.
So I am a woman, and thanks for inviting me up here to speak.
I can see that.
My comments are going to be very brief, and it's sort of to reinforce and echo a statement made around private sector commitment to the region. So I know Rob well, I know Nature Vest well. I work at an investment bank in New York, and for the last several years, we've been having conversations on this topic of blue financing, and all I can say is exactly what the panelists said, which is that there is interest and investment and commitment from the private sector to mobilize capital, but it has to be, in our case, alongside the public sector. So again, to echo the messages we heard. So we look forward to continuing this conversation forward and really value the inputs from the government as well as our development bank partners.
Thank you so much, and it's great to have institutions such as yours also really on board, and this idea of the complementarity, I think, of different sources of finance and finance providers for this agenda is really important. We're out of time. I'm not sure if any of our panelists have any burning comments or reactions that they want to make. Yes, please.
Just one on capacity to end on a positive note that both the CDB and the World Bank together are trying to, walk the talk on coordination. And we are hoping to jointly work on a capacity support initiative, which is going to be supported by a bilateral donor, to fan out a team of experts across the region on need basis.
Super.
So we are trying to do this jointly with the CDB, housed in the CDB, but together so that we don't duplicate efforts. I mean, it's a step towards coordination on capacity.
Super, thank you.
Yes, and finally, I just want to reemphasize that we have to chart a path towards industrial diversification in the region. We have to bring in new innovative industries, producing them in the region, and integrating into the global economy and shipping these things on the maritime highway, superhighway.
I just want to say I'm very excited about the opportunities. We're looking to replicate what we did in the Seychelles here in the region. We're already in conversations. I think our next country will be here in Grenada, but we've also been talking to a few of the other countries in the region, and we'd love to help make this happen.
Thank you, and to echo that call from the perspective of the United Nations Development Programme, our door is always open as well to collaborations with all of you and with the organisations represented here on the panel. I think it's great to end on a positive note. The report has a positive title, Financing the Blue Economy, a Caribbean Development Opportunity. There's already a lot of exciting stuff going on we can build on. It's an ocean of opportunity out there. I'd like to thank the Caribbean Development Bank for organising this session, and I think it's been an excellent collaboration between our organisations on this report, a partnership. I hope we can continue on this agenda in the future. Thank you to the government of Grenada for hosting us. Thanks to all of you for coming and listening, and I see this very much as just the start of an ongoing conversation. So onwards and upwards, and until the next time, have a very good rest of your day. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of our panelists as well. Thank you.